So I'll start. My name is Carl Brand. I grew up in Canton City, downtown. When I was a boy, I loved everything military. I collected pictures like this.
Yeah, I see that. That's so sweet.
I've got thousands, and I was hooked on anything Marine Corps. Just loved it. In the ninth grade, I met a Marine Corps recruiter who tried to recruit me, but he didn't know I was a kid, so I kind of played along with him for months on end, and then finally told him I'm a ninth grader. I can't. So
That's crazy.
I ended up, by the time I was a senior, I really knew I was going to end up in the Marine Corps just because of, I grew up in the 60s and 70s when Marine Corps movies were all over TV. You were watching John Wayne and those guys.
It's all over.
So they were like the knights of the round table. You thought these were the best good people you could know. So by the time I went to college, I wanted to go to college, but I didn't. I wasn't, my family wasn't wealthy. So in fact, I was the very first person to ever go to college. So the only way to get there for me was through the Marine Corps. And I was going to go to college. That's how I ended up in the Marine Corps, was strictly for college money.
So you just went to the military, and then after the military,
Went to
you went to
college.
college, and they paid for all that, right?
They paid for everything.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about the demilitarized zone. The first question I have is, why were you sent there?
Well,
What was the reason?
when I first got into the Marine Corps, it was like it was a lot of peacetime. Nobody thought there would ever be wars again. I remember guys saying, "Oh, there'll never be a war again," because it's and when I first went through, we were like, well, we were all just guys going to stay in America. We're going to be in Camp Lejeune, and then we started to hear things about that Korea was the place that the Marines rotated to be in a warlike situation. So. Coming into the Marine Corps, I thought it was really cool because dress blues looked good, and you were tough, and you could play the real. You were one of America's best fighting guys, and all that kind of stuff. That was really big time for us. But while on camp, I went through Paris Island, through boot camp, and that's the notorious place. That's where people go, and people remember it for the rest of their lives and never forget it. So I ended up. They sent me to the fleet. That word scared me at first. You're going to the fleet. You're going to where the rusty, crusty, tough guys are and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up in a battalion, an infantry battalion. I went through Camp Geiger training battalion to become an infantryman. And my first assignment was the Panama Canal. That's where I went first. But right after that, we were all going to go to South Korea on a thing called Operation Bear Hunt. And that's where, and at that time, I didn't really understand what all that meant. I was just going where I was told to go. And but the thing that really amazed me was the amount of people. You'd have 1,000 guys getting on
That's so crazy.
at an airport, and we were all getting in these humongous planes with all our weaponry and all our stuff, and we're all in these planes flying to Alaska and then to Japan, and you felt like you were part of something big because it was huge, a lot of guys. But in the end, you were only with your little small squad.
Group,
you had your friend group,
that's
you guys talk about now. And we had our friend group. You had your 5 guys on your fire team. It went company, platoon, squad, fire team. There were 2 fire teams on a 13-man team. So your little fire team was your guys. And that's who you hung out with.
That's sweet,
So that's how we ended up in Korea. It was one of my first rotations.
So you said how when you heard the word fleet, you were kind of were you scared of it?
Well, the fleet was because the drill instructors had really played that up. You're going to get your stuff straightened up, buddy. You're going to get straightened up when you get to the fleet. Don't fool around the fleet, because what you did is you would stay. After a time in the Marine Corps, you became salty, and your uniforms became salty, and that came from being out on the sea, and you were an old timer, and our stuff was all brand new. You get out to the fleet, they'll know who you are, right? You're a boot. They called you a boot. You're a boot from boot camp, because your stuff was new. So awesome. It did it. Because I thought, because you don't know what's coming.
So what was your exact first feeling when you were told that you were going there? Were you nervous?
I was, because I originally had signed up to be a tank driver.
Yeah.
But I was too tall.
Really?
So they told me I couldn't be a tank driver. So the secondary thing on your contract, they give you these contracts. They tell you what you're going to be, but there's a secondary one. It's always the infantry. I said, you're in the infantry now. Oh man, I'm in the infantry. So so that's how I ended up as an 0311. That's what we call it, 03 field, 0311 infantry ground pounder. So that's how I ended up in the Marine Corps. That's how I ended up in my unit. And when they said fleet, it was like, those are the guys that are fighting like Iwo Jima and the Battle of Da Nang and Vietnam. I mean, those were the guys that did the fighting. You were the fighters. You weren't the support team. That's what scared me about the fleet.
Yeah, that is pretty scary.
You'd be fighting.
So, what was the intensity like when you got there? Like, when you were there that whole
time? The thing I remember the most about it was we were flying these things called, C-170s. They're like these big Boeing planes, and you're all sitting in straps. They're not seats, they're straps. And we were all kind of looking out the airplane, and I remember some of the guys going like this, like they're looking out at the hills, and it's hills, it's hills. I thought I was going into the jungle again, because I wasn't I wasn't a big reader at that time. I'm thinking I'm going to a hot place. I ended up in, it was cold. It was colder than anything I ever was in. So it was, and then I remember the first time I landed, and we got out of the planes, and the South Koreans were coming up to help us unload. I'd never seen people like that.
Yeah.
So they were foreign to me. They were looking at me, and
different.
I'm looking at them, and we're all looking at each other like, man. And I couldn't believe how much they liked us. Like they were just like flashing us the peace sign. It really was only like 40 years since the big fight had taken place, like maybe 35, 40. So they were all flashing us a peace sign, and everybody liked us. And we're all just looking at each other, and then they flew us up, and we did a combat landing where they bounced the plane on the ground because just practicing, and you just bouncing around, and it was, and then got out there. What was crazy was all that militarization, all that high-powered energy. And all around us were yaks and different kinds of cattle, what they call it. But it was little guys pulling. It was just a mix of very old and very new. It was a strange world.
Yeah, that would be weird.
Strange world.
So that kind of leads into the next question. What was the U.S. and South Korea like? What was their relationship like when you got there? You kind of answered it, but
well, the relationship was odd because I had never been there. So it was like these military guys the South Koreans wanted to meet us so they could speak English with us to practice. And they were interested in what kind of weapons we were carrying because they were carrying older stuff.
Okay, so they weren't
as modernized as us. So we're looking at them thinking, I carried that thing like, I saw guys carrying that like 10 years ago on TV. So they had all our hand-me-downs. So we were so much bigger than they were. Like they were smaller than us, and we stood over heads and shoulders. But they were smart. It's like it was like teamwork, like now I tell you, teamwork.
So they didn't feel like you guys were like dominating them, or
no,
like,
we were team.
Like kind of like looking down on them, like we're better, bigger and better.
No, we were team.
That's good. That's good.
Then you would go to these specialized type of practice. You know how you climb up the wires, climb across ropes, all these combat courses.
Yeah.
And we would come up, and us Americans would have all these special safety things to hold us so we wouldn't fall off of them. They actually had death wreaths because they had no safety lines. They would go up the combat course, and you fell off,
You're done, yeah.
So we were like amazed by them, how tough they were. They were called Rock Marines.
Okay, yeah, so they were like mentally tough.
The Rock Marines, well, they were physically and mentally tough because they were living on the battle line. And they were anti-North Korean, and they would fight to the death.
Right.
But we would look at them like, man, these guys, they're dying. It was like 20 guys died on this thing.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, hook me up, man.
That's so crazy. So, what was like one of your most memorable times or like events that happened while you were there?
Well, when you come in in this big airport, and then you get on what we call 6x or trucks. We get a truck and trash you all in like sardines. You drive up to the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. The most memorable thing I remember was coming into the MASH camps. They were like old MASH camps that you saw on TV. They were tent cities. And And you'd come into these tent cities and they had ditches that were dug that were latrines, and then they would put a big 55-gallon drum in the ground, and that was the latrine. And you'd walk into the tent and there was a hot belly stove, and 50 of you would be in together, shoulder to shoulder, next to this little tub because you were freezing to death. Yeah. And I remember just thinking, man, this is really, it was all in mud. Like, this is real, this is not America.
Yeah, that sounds really tough.
We were in the mountains, and you had crates on the ground that you could stay out in the mud. And if you had to go to the showers, hundreds of you would go to the shower at the same time. And then there'd be hundreds of you in there, and just with tents. And when the hot water would hit, it would cause all kind of fog. It was so freezing cold. And just being in, and then there were no street lamps, but there were wires that were strung with just the lights. It was like another world to me. That little city. I have a bunch of pictures of it, and it's kind of interesting.
So
Yeah.
Now, the fence that was built or put up, was that any helpful from
The DMZ? Well, the thing is you never got right next to the DMZ because there was a lot of shooting back and forth across.
Okay, so there's a constant.
They had a side, we have a side, and then in between is called the dead man zone, no man zone. And the South Koreans would have these, on the tops of the mountains would have like these big standing houses. I don't know what you would call them, but they were just guard posts.
Like a watchtower.
And they would stand up in those, and you'd hear them shooting at each other.
Wow.
And we would be right behind them. So it's not, I think that was so we wouldn't cause international incidents. So we just patrolled that fence line. We didn't, like, they were there.
Yeah.
They were there for like 40 years before we got there. And we just, we were constantly doing combat maneuvers in those mountains, right next to the fence line. But you could hear the North and the South Koreans talking trash each other. Like they would do propaganda. Like the thing that scared me the most the whole time was in South Korea. Like it still has left things that I remember a lot. And you know how people say they dream about stuff.
Yeah.
The thing I dream about the most with them was in the morning the North Koreans would come up over the hill and they would play super loud music.
Really? Okay.
And they would come over the hill in platoon. They'd all be shoulder to shoulder. And what I remember is they would run side to side. They didn't run like
straight.
They would stand straight up.
Their arms would go side.
And there'd be like 4 men across.
Wow.
10 deep each. And they would run side to side. You could hear them over there, and you could.
Oh my goodness.
And you're like, and you know they're running, and you
Yeah.
could see them kind of running because they were running different than we run. And they were like being real, but they were smaller than us.
Do you think like the way they were running was forced, like to make them run like that, or was it something that?
That's how they were forced to intimidate us, to put fear in us.
Which it's kind of weird.
And so the American side, we were putting in South Korea, we were there to scare them, like to intimidate them.
Do you think that worked, or did they still kind of like?
I think that's what the two, like modern day,
Yeah.
like you hear, they sent over troops to. I think it's just all about bullying each other.
Yeah.
So put a big team up,
Yeah.
big boys up, and we'll all go at it. And that's kind of how. But you really didn't even know who they were. We were just, you know, the old story is most military people, Marines, Army, all that. You go into a place, you really don't know where you are. You don't know what you're doing.
Right. Clueless.
You're trusting on these old guys that are like 35. They're
Which
old.
that's not even old. Yeah.
Yeah, they were like real old guys, 40-year-old guys. They look like they were just old guys. And you're hoping they don't get you into trouble.
Yeah. I remember you were telling me a story about how, I forget what happened before, but you guys went and cut down all the trees. You want to tell that story? You remember that?
Well, we would get into places and you would cut down stuff, and because you would use the resources, but a lot of it, what we call these tanks we would ride in were called LTVPs. They could travel. We called them pigs, pigs or hogs. And this thing, it sounded like a pig or a hog, because it was
loud, yeah.
And you would be, and you were inside this thing, you're all bouncing around in there. So there's like 12 of you in the squad, and it has a roof over it, and it's just knocking trees down, and you're just taking trees out. and you could hear it. When it would hit a tree, you'd get the big bump. But you always have to wear your helmet and all your gear because you'd knock each other.
Yeah.
It was all metal in there, and that was truly for me was something that I remember a lot too. Just being locked into that thing, and you can't get out of it until it stops and the doors drop.
Right.
So you're like, but you'd get in there because you were dry. It was nice to be dry.
So you were saying how you like had relationships with the one like group of yours. Tell me about the relationships you had with them. Like how close were all of you guys? Did you like everyone?
You know, it's like
Make sure this is recording. Okay.
you get into points with guys like to this day. We have a Facebook group where we all still communicate. I feel like I know those guys better than anybody. One of my friends, I've seen him every year for nearly 30 years, and my buddy Wade. You become that you know that it's kind of cliche, but you get to be brothers.
Yeah, true.
Because you're sleeping with each other, and it's like, and you're so close. Like I carried half a tent, Wade would carry half a tent, and so that's how everybody had half of a tent, a shelter half.
Yeah.
So you had guys that you were more comfortable with. So like Wade and I were always hooch mates, so we were always, and we could put a tent up quick. I mean, it'd be freezing cold, and they'd say, "All right, you guys, put up your tent. We're sleeping here tonight, man." What was up?
Right to it.
We were up because the quicker you got that thing up, but you look back on it, you could barely fit in at one guy. Two of you get in there in your sleeping bags. I mean, you were scrunched up, but that helped you to conserve heat.
Yeah.
So you really bonded with those guys, and then you had to trust. At night, somebody had to keep the fires going. So you had to trust the guys in your squad to keep that fire going.
Did you guys like take turns for the person who would be the one to keep the fire going?
Oh yeah. That's called fire watch.
Okay.
Fire watch, but out in combat, if you're in a combat situation and you're in the field, that you call that you're on an alert because you're watching for anything moving or sneaking up on you or anything like that. So that guy feeding that fire was keeping you warm and watching over the camp to know what's good. Because back then we didn't have it was like the Neanderthals because we didn't have all this equipment.
Yeah.
It was like you went out to the woods and it was you, and your radios barely contacted people. It barely worked.
So, like, do you know anything about the newer technology that military has?
Yeah.
Does it blow your mind?
It does. When I read it, I think, oh man, because our big thing was we couldn't go. You were always afraid to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Because if you went to sleep, that's when you're most vulnerable when you're sleeping. Now they have these drones and they have force protection. Where things protect the force. They have people in charge of protecting the force.
That's so crazy.
So back then we were the force. You protected yourself.
Yeah.
So I look at those pieces of equipment now, and recently I was able to put on a pair of night vision goggles. Wow.
It's clear.
It's clear. You could see things. We had a thing called a starlight. The stars came down. It was a great big huge thing, and you didn't want to be the sapsucker that had to carry it because it's so heavy. It was like a suitcase.
Yeah.
And you couldn't see anything. Once you put it on your eye, you were blinded by it. So if you were the guy carrying that sucker and you used it, you were then unable to see because it would ruin your night vision.
Wow.
And this equipment now, like you could see people coming at you. Like the people that were my sergeants were all Vietnam era veterans. I mean, they were in combat. And their thing was, in Vietnam, was that the Viet Cong owned the night, and we owned the day. We could trash you in the daytime. We could kill you.
Yeah.
But the nighttime, that's when you had to be scared. That's when you had to be on your guard.
Yeah.
So like the sergeant majors would always talk about, I don't want to catch you sleeping. Don't let me catch you sleeping. There better be somebody awake when I walk in there.
So they didn't want everyone sleeping.
Like they would go on different types of alert. So say there were 30 of you. The platoon was together, maybe 30 to 40 guys. They would say 50% alert. So 2 of you guys would break out. 1 of you is awake at all times. So half the force is awake.
That's so crazy.
Till you switch. Then like 2 or 3 hours later, you take turns.
So were you guys just like, were you exhausted like at all times?
Just exhausted.
Sleep deprived, just wanting to sleep.
But I think that was part of the training. And you were just physically, mentally exhausted. exhausted. So when you would sleep, when there would come a point, they would say, okay, now you can go to sleep. You would just drop like a rock.
Oh, so you had no problem sleeping?
I could fall asleep.
You could
like
just
a
go
rock.
like that.
Most guys could just put their head together. Like you'd be in a tank and it's just roaring along. You out you went.
Wow.
Like I could fall asleep on a dime. I still say I could do it. I could fall asleep like right now. Because you were so deprived of sleep, it's just like whatever chance you had. You didn't want to eat or smoke a cigarette or anything. You want to sleep.
Yeah. You
could catch a guy in a truck just like 80 miles an hour. You got just knocked out.
Just sleeping, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. How was communication with your family, like during the time you were there? Did you get to communicate with anyone, or?
Well, I'll tell you, that's one of the things that blows me away about modern day, how these people talk to each other.
Yeah.
Like you were done.
You were
just separated.
Blocked off.
Cut.
Wow.
You could send a letter, and you really did hope for letters. Like I was, that 19, I was in from 82 to 85. That period of time was a transition period from, because the technology started hitting in the 80s. So by the time it started hitting in the 80s, we were like, we were still old school to where we had to go to, you had to go to these called Mars stations. It would have a big antenna 10 feet high, 50 feet high, and you only got 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
And you get out. You could call home and say, hey, I'm all right.
And then you're out.
Then you're out. You get out, next guy. And you didn't get to talk a lot. So you really were separated from your family.
Wow.
I remember one guy, he was, because when you get so cold and so hungry and you're tired, you start to not be who you are. You start to change who you are. And this one kid, I remember him saying, because he just got to the end of his rope. And by the time he got to the end of his rope, he couldn't focus anymore. And I remember him crying and saying, I just need to be home where somebody loves me. And that, like, oh my God, yeah, it was a very powerful moment. And he was okay the next day. I mean, he's okay because you would get to the point where you would just be mentally not able to cope.
Yeah.
For a day or two.
Yeah.
And then you get yourself together. You get some sleep. You get some food. You be all right.
Did you like see anyone who like just completely lost it and just went insane? Like they just couldn't.
Not so much insane. I think, and the thing is when you're in those units, and like guys will tell you this, you don't make fun of anybody.
Yeah. No.
Anybody that has a crisis point, you just leave them alone.
Yeah.
Because they'll be okay. One of my, a real good friend of mine, we had been marching all night. And the military has their name, Operation Bear Hunt.
Yeah.
Now the guys will come up with different names. Like we had Operation Misery.
Okay.
And that's what we called it. We walked all night in the freezing cold rain, and we had 70-pound packs, and we were just walking on this huge, we called him a hump. One guy behind the other guy. And the only way you could tell where that guy was he had snake eyes on the back that glowed in the dark on the helmet. And you'd follow those two little glowing dots of the guy. If you lost contact, you're lost.
Yeah.
So all night freezing, and I remember this guy really well, and we came to a huge hay mound that had plastic wrapped over the top of it to protect it, and we all dug into that underneath that plastic, and we kind of just sat in there. And if any Marine even probably to this day, your rifle is the thing you protect, so you had your rifle next to you, and you're just freezing. And I remember this guy just losing it, and no one did a thing. They just let him sit there and freak out.
How was he like after it? Like,
he just fell asleep after that, and he was okay the next day. Nobody ever talked about it.
And he was just good. He's back on track.
You're good. Yeah, because people just have a meltdown.
Yeah.
It's just like, I can't handle this thing.
Did you ever like feel yourself reaching that point?
I did.
You're just like, I can't.
The whole thing in Korea was practicing for the big battle. So those tanks that we called hogs were amphibious. So one of the hogs that we were in, it would literally come out the back of a ship and jump into the water as a tank.
Wow.
And it would float across the water to the beach. Well, it had bilge pumps that would pump water out of it. Now inside this thing, you were in this little apartment kind of thing, and there was a bright red light that would sit at the head. and heat would come off of that thing. And we were all sitting there, and it was just roaring, and you could hear it sucking water out, throwing water out, and bouncing in the ocean. Well, ours stopped, and it just, you could hear the it stops.
Like, yeah.
So then I was kind of right underneath of the cabin where the guy who was driving it was, and I saw him get on the top and shoot a flare. He took out a flare, and he just hit it, and I saw that flare shoot. And just as I saw that flare go, I saw him, he slammed the tank door shut and sealed it.
Wow.
Because what happens is, in order to save you in there,
You have to.
they seal it, and if it sinks, he has to come down and push a button or something to open the top hatches to let us out. Well, it stopped, and the bilges stopped, and the water started to rise.
Oh boy.
And there's like, maybe 8 of us, maybe 8 to 12 of us in there, and the water was rising.
Slowly
coming up, and we were all kind of freaking.
Yeah.
And directly over there was a guy just started banging crap out of the wall, and they let us out of it. And I kind of had that point where I had my little, I like freaked.
Yeah.
I got to the point where I just became paralyzed.
Yeah.
You know, I just sit there and I just froze because I knew that I can't swim well.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to die if that thing sinks.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get out of this.
Wow.
And because I know if that water, because I kept thinking that roof is going to open like this,
Yeah.
and we're 50 feet or 30 feet down in the ocean. You had to swim to the top, and you got all this gear on.
Yeah, and the water's coming in probably pretty
I was
much.
so scared. That is the worst thing I've ever had in my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't combat or anything.
No.
It was just practicing. You're going to die there. And so many guys died just in their training.
Really?
A lot of people don't know that.
I was going to ask you that. Like, did you? A lot of people die in training.
People die in training. You know, one of my favorite stories about World War II is just about the same number of people died training for D-Day as died on D-Day.
Really?
Yeah, research that. So
wow.
you know in the training, because there's always a training death.
Mm-hmm.
Some like the pigs and the hogs as
Yeah.
they're running over the ground. There'll be guys, they'll just smoosh them.
Wow.
Helicopters crash all the time. Even nowadays, they still crash. So training can be just as dangerous as anything else.
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, I mean they have crashes and accidents.
Mm-hmm.
Things stop working, and the engine stops. And So that was that's probably the most difficult thing I ever went through in my life. I still will not go out to the water. I can't swim. I can't get in water past my hip.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. Are there any other experiences that you can think of off the top of your head that you would want to talk about?
Oh gosh, I could talk for hours. I'm not kidding you. It was so pivotal in my life. But the most important things were the connections to people. Like to this day, I remember every single guy's name. It's like in our Facebook thing, Captain Foley got on it. Captain Foley?
Yeah.
I mean, he's like Superman to me.
Yeah.
And he's hobnobbing with us. I mean, he's talking to us.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. But now he ended up becoming like a colonel at the end. But at that time, he's just Superman to me. A guy named JP, who was my sergeant, my platoon sergeant, JP was Superman. I looked at, he was 22, I was 19. I thought he was an old man.
Right.
And JP, just the connections to the people, and like we went into a Buddhist temple with all our guys, and just being with those people, like you bond, we'll be friends forever.
Yeah.
I mean, all 50, there's 50, 60 of us on right now that we're always talking.
That's so sweet. I find that so awesome.
Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, so I brought with me to give you I was a radio man.
Okay.
And the reason was I was pretty good. I could read pretty well. And back then, you had a lot of Marines who were put in there by the judge. So we had a lot of guys who they didn't volunteer because they wanted to, and we were poor kids. So I was pretty good, and I could memorize and read things. So I thought when I left Korea, I was taking this map with me.
So
I've had it forever with me. It's it's just an old map, and I still to this day I look at it and I'm thinking, I don't know where the hell I was. Like I could tell, like I see where we wrote down guys' names on it, and that's probably most important for me. But it's such a memento for me just to touch it, because I carried this for like 3 months through the deep snow.
That's so
Through those rice paddies, because when you would sleep in the rice paddies aren't flat. When they cut all the rice down, it leaves 3 prongs, and they stick up every 2 inches, so you would fall on them. And I always try to look at this map and see, I wonder where that was, because it was just such a hard time.
You can't find it on there.
I really can't. I can see, like back then, only road you worried about was between this mountain range and this mountain, and then in the valley. Where were you in relation to the other guys? That was it.
Yeah. All right. I think I only have one more question, just to wrap it up, and it's tell me about your life after leaving the military.
Well, I came to the point where I got discharged. I was actually afraid to leave because I got so used to it.
Yeah.
I wonder how I'll do. And I was able to get out.
Show that.
Yeah, I can show that on there.
I was able to get out of. I left. First thing I did was enroll in college. I'm going to school. Hell or high water. I'm going to college.
Where'd you go to college?
I started at Kent State.
Okay.
And then I graduated from Walsh, and then I went to Akron U and got my master's. So I just had a driving desire to, because they used to call me the professor, because I was the reader.
Yeah. So
all the guys would call me the professor, and I thought, and to this day they always say, Brand, you got your degree? Yeah, I got my degree. So I did. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to have that BA, and then I wanted that MA, and it's like I just want that. Because I think when we grow up, you focus on something that means success to you.
Yeah. And
it was a degree for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way. That's exactly how I look at it.
You feel like you're successful.
If I get a degree, I will be successful. Yeah.
And so once I came out of the Marine Corps, my God, there was nothing. I was like, I went to work full time at the post office, full time, and I went to college full time.
Wow.
And I graduated with cum laude. I was about like a 3.7 something.
That's awesome.
Full time work, full time school. But the Marine Corps did that because they made me, because I was on bending. I was like, I don't care if it kills me, I'm going to get this done.
That's tough.
And I did it. I know it was. I used to carry, when I would go to work, I would carry codes. Like a football player has codes.
Yep.
Quarterback. I would wrap those on my wrist to study while I was working at the post office, and then I would study while I was working the mail. And that's how I graduated.
That's crazy. Yeah. That's awesome.
I had all
that's
kinds of
dedication.
I was going to graduate, dude. Marine Corps was a good thing. It gave me my whole life.
So I was gonna say, so you think it like made definitely like more of a positive impact in your life than negative?
It did, because I didn't have people who had vision. I didn't have people who were ever going to go to college. I didn't have people that ever had strength of character. I mean, when I learned how to be a father in the Marine Corps. Remember those lieutenants and the colonels with their sons? I mean, I was so impressed how they raised their sons. We would go to church, and their sons would come to church, and I thought, man, that's how a dad is.
Yeah.
And then I learned how to be a dad. They helped me get a house. I was able to get a job. I was able to get a degree.
That's awesome.
It gave me my whole life. Marine Corps gave me my whole life. So I can, yes, there were difficult situations. Yes, I still have, people, I can't stand people thanking me for service. So thank you for your service.
You're not a fan of that.
I hate that. I'm like, no, it was a great job.
Yeah.
Fantastic people. They gave me everything. You have to thank me for anything.
Right.
I was happy to be there.
Yeah.
So when I hear that, thank you. Now, different though with a guy who's been shot. I always say, somebody's got a Purple Heart or been into real combat, thank you for your service.
Yeah.
But the rest of us, my God, thank you. Thank you for letting me be there.
Yes.
So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Love the Marine Corps. Love them.
Well, that's pretty much it.
Okay. We're all done. All right, sir.
Thank you.